This is my home. Beautiful, isn't it? I've lived here for 10.5 years now. Australia's first Indigenous people came here 60,000 years before me. There are many of us that call this island home. Many more will come, like my ancestors did, or will be born here like me. A lot has changed over the last couple hundred years, but some things will never change. We need healthy soil, clean water, and fresh air. A wise man once said, "A nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." Forests are the lungs of our land. President Roosevelt said that. He was a pretty smart guy. My mom's pretty smart too. She says that us agriculturalists have a big job ahead of us to make the soil healthy again. She also says it's really important because healthy soil grows healthy plants, and that makes us healthy too.
And then we're going to go into specific biologies and what some of them do, what we've found them to do. And in there you'll see that talking about carbon, where mycorrhizal fungi is very beneficial to carbon. Medical research has been dominated by the bazooka mentality, which is nuke, and so has agricultural science to a degree. This is now changing with the regenerative soil practices, and I'm seeing more and more of it, and it's great. It's great. To see grower groups like this 20 years ago, I don't think so, on these subjects, so it's great to see. Bacillus, that's the main area that I've worked in, although I do work with fungi as well. An example of what they can do. As you use a soil regeneration approach and build microbial soil diversity, your requirement for chemical inputs reduces by mode of action by some of the soil biota. So in reality, as you're regenerating, you're building those numbers, you're slowly pulling back on the need for, say, a fungicide application. So when I see people on a program where it goes on regular and it's not targeted specific, you're really giving yourself very little chance to regenerate your soil. Looking at a single bacillus and its capabilities alone are amazing. Scientists have found that Bacillus subtilis, it actually secretes an antimicrobial peptide that temporarily suppresses pathogens, and we've seen that quite a few times. This in turn helps ward off the soil-borne pathogens while a plant's defences are compromised. And I've seen that too, where we've had a fusarium outbreak in a melon patch, and we know it's going to take the whole lot out, so we'll treat with subtilis and a few other compounds, and we've been able to pull it up. It doesn't mean you can revive it, we've pulled it up, so we've saved the crop from going. I use trichodermas quite a bit when I'm dealing with some fungal diseases. They're quite aggressive, trichoderma. They should be, if you're using them, you try and deliver them as close to the root system as you possibly can. But by all means, no means should you be overdoing any one element. There's a balance, there's a finite balance in there. Pseudomonas Fluorescens is a mycorrhizal helper bacteria. So this is showing you the relationships taking place, just one of them. Mycorrhizal shares carbohydrates with Pseudomonas, and in return Pseudomonas produces enzymes that can solubilise fixed phosphates. Mycorrhizal will then transport these solubilised phosphates into the host plant food. So there's a process, and everybody's looking after each other. And that's why if you can use a regenerative approach, rethink when you put a chemical on, because you send it backwards every time we do this. Microbes need carbon for food. And again, carbon is so important, and the different types of carbons. And we're depleting our soils of this element by using chemical fertilisers, chemicals, and overploughing, amongst other detrimental farm practices. By using a regenerative approach to soil, allowing soil's natural elements to do their job, your inputs of chemicals reduce over time, even if you just do it in a very slow process. Carbon in the soil is extremely important in the process of soil biology completing their functions. It's really important to have those food sources. I have people who say, I just want to put some biology on, I want to do this. I said, well, What are your food sources? What are you going to feed it? What have you got to offer it in the first place?
Basically looking for a way to sequester large quantities of carbon out of the air and put it somewhere sensible, which is obviously into our agricultural soils. We've got a technology that's based around fungus that has this peculiar ability to sequester large amounts of carbon into the soil. So we've trialled it on canola, subclover, cotton and ladlab so far. So it's early days, we've got a long way to go, but in all those trials it's done an extraordinary amount of carbon sequestration. So our hope is, as a research institute, to develop an inoculum that farmers could use on all crops someday, where in a similar fashion that we use our legume inoculums to inoculate legumes for taking nitrogen out of the air and sequestering it into the soil for plant use. This fungus has the ability to take carbon out of the air and sequester it into the soil for plant use. Given that soil represents the single largest terrestrial carbon sink on the planet, some 550 million hectares, half a billion hectares, that's down to annual cropping alone around the world, and around 1.8 billion hectares of actual cropping country if you include dryland cropping, and somewhere around about 3 billion hectares if you count the grazing. So it's a massive terrestrial carbon sink. It's the biggest carbon sink on the planet, which makes farmers, of course, the largest climate army on the planet. So we need to be able to work with farmers to find out how can we make it easy for farmers to sequester carbon in the soil. So that's the world carbon sink. So that's the carbon intensity map. So it's the largest terrestrial carbon sink. And there's 550 million hectares of intensively farmed agriculture around the world. So that's what we're dealing with. The original work was done with subclover out of Sydney University in grey chamber work, and they were able to record a 17% increase in soil organic carbon in 14 weeks, which with unprecedented level of carbon sequestration, as you probably appreciate, that's really rapid deposition of carbon into the root zone. I believe some of you may be aware the first carbon credits were sold last week under the Paris Agreement, very first ones in the world, and it was in Australia and in Victoria, and it's the first real clear evidence that this stuff can be monetized. The world actually will pay money for people to store carbon in the soil. So to find a really good technique to be able to reliably increase carbon in the soil is really something we're highly focused on. Really what Soil Quest is about. We know we've got a challenge with climate change. We can't solve climate change retrospectively. It's not like we can get 100% agreement that everyone wants to do something about climate change and then we start to do something about climate change. It's like it's going to be too late by then. We just need to roll our sleeves up and get stuff done. And it's what we do today and from here on in that will make all the difference for the next generation. If we decide not to do anything, all the scientific research looks fairly bleak. We actually need to act, be responsible parents and do something about this issue that's coming down the road at us. And sequestering carbon in soil seems like a pretty good win-win thing that people can get excited about, get into. There's no downside to doing it. And there's lots of fun growing healthy crops in high carbon soil. So that's what we're trying to achieve.
We might wrap it up there, Guy. Thank you so much for your time, and we really enjoyed that. I was speaking for myself, but everyone looks pretty pretty stoked on that. So give Guy a round of applause. I'd like to introduce Peter Massasso. Some of you may know him. He's a bit of a legend of these parts. A highly sorted out consultant. Peter's worked in lots of he could probably tell you about his career for ages, but maybe over lunch, because he's got heaps of good information to share.
Plant is part of a system, and that system has microbes as a part. Yes, you can get some amazing conversation starting to happen, but don't dismiss the other stuff that has to go on in the background. So varieties, so planting times, soil temperatures, soil amendments, pHs, fertilisers. So I just wanted to intro with that, just to be aware that there's a lot more. And this was the end slide, but that's something really important to remember, is no matter how much you do and whatever you've done, 6 inches of soil is more important than you'll ever be. Three to 5 years is a start point. You might start to see slight changes. If you're dealing with tree crops, there's an opinion, okay, wind it back 25 years. Citrus, America, citrus is biennial. You get a good crop this year, you get a bad crop next year, you get a good... So you need 5 years to be able to say. Then they discovered that if you feed it on its heavy year, more than what you would normally feed it, the yield in the following year doesn't fall as far. So they've been able to fix a biennial bearing nature in citrus, which has been maintained and sustained in the citrus industry. Tahitian limes are a little bit different. We're talking about oranges and lemons, which flower, fruit, single cycle, annual cycle. So you need data sets. Data sets once a year. If you've got a biennial crop, avocados are also fitting into that category, but with better nutrition, water management, disease management, we're getting less variation between our years. But I would challenge anyone to show me a consistent 100% no variation in yield year in, year out for 5 years. And that's my goal, that's what I'm working with. And I'm not saying anything until we've done 5 years. We're at about 4. We'll see with the microscope, we'll go into the food web, we'll see how complex that is. If you can imagine a spider's web and you're pulling on one string and everything else bends, that's essentially what happens. And when you throw nitrogen at it, that whole thing flexes. So it's no longer the focal point of the spider's in the middle. He's pulled up here or down here. You change irrigation and that whole thing twists or breaks. And when it starts breaking, there's no flies, the spider dies, you don't get your crop. It's a system. There's a lot of parts in play in that soil zone. And there's different zones in the soil, and some have oxygen and some don't, but in different zones, different players are important for the roles that they play.
So this is Lisa Price, everyone from Barefoot Farming. She's brought her microscope along and has got some interesting information to share with us about the soil food web. So let's give Lisa a round of applause.
Thanks, Sally. Thanks for inviting me today. It's been really interesting listening to the speakers. I'm not a scientist, I'm just a market gardener farmer, but I have a real interest in the biology and I can't see it, so I've bought a microscope so I can actually see what I'm doing. So biodynamic, for those that don't know, it's just another form of organic farming. So that's why the biology is very interesting for us, because we actually are going down that track anyway. We're using animals and plants to actually create a fertility on the farm. I'll just go through a few of the things that we'll see in the microscope. So bacteria, these are the decomposers, and we try and think of them as little bags of fertiliser. What they've broken down, eating our organic matter or whatever they've got, they're holding it in their bodies. It's not being leached out into the oceans. When I look in the microscope, I can see different shapes. I don't know what the species are, but I've learnt that if they're round, they're a cocci. If they've got they're rod shaped, they're bacilli. And if they're spiralling, so sometimes you'll see them like that. I know they're not the really good ones, and I might have to get in and do something and fix my soil or my compost. So this is what we'll see in the microscope, and what I've learnt is to see the bacteria, and it's really hard because this is just a still picture, but the little circles. So anyway, I can see bacteria in there, and I'm not looking for certain things, I'm just looking for diversity. I want the whole supermarket of biology in my soil. So when I see just one sort of bacteria, maybe if I just see the round or the rods, you know, I want to see small, I want to see big, I want to see fat. Bacteria is the same size as a clay particle. It's very small. I've also been taught that the blotches of colour that we're seeing, these are the glues that the bacteria and the fungi make. So if it's a real honey coloured, it's ulmic acids. And if it's a tan colour, it's fulvic acids, and the really dark ones are the humic acids. So just a bit of information on fungi. They sweat out an enzyme that is slightly acidic, and that goes out ahead of them breaking down organic substances. So if you can imagine the fungi's growing along, it's actually sweating out an enzyme that's actually breaking down its food before it even gets there, and then it grows into it. They seek out water and nutrients for the plants, especially phosphorus. So we've heard that today. They've got these amazing chemical scissors, I like to think of them as, and they can break open the bonds of your phosphorus. They're a transporter of nutrients. Yep, we think of them as little conveyor belts now on our farm. In dry conditions, fungi can breathe in humid air, condensing into water for whatever they need it for. And I've read somewhere in a book that if they've got enough nutrition, they can actually spit out water that will actually break concrete or do stuff with it. It's what we know about in our soil, we know more about the stars than what we know in the soil. We're just on the tip of it. And it takes hundreds and thousands of them for us to see. So if we see them growing, we know there's a lot of fungi there. So we can have bacteria and we can have fungi, but there's the plants, unless it's the mycorrhizal, the plant's not getting much nutrient out. They actually need to be eaten. And that's where these protozoas, these bigger guys, come in. And there's three groups. There's amoebas, flagellates, and ciliates. So this is a picture of a ciliate, and he's got little tiny hairs all around him, and they're called ciliates. Ciliates, I've been told, are just a sign that your compost or your soils are growing anaerobic. So if I see too many of them in my slide, it's like, wow, we've got to get some oxygen in here or do something. This is a rotifer, so it's another protozoa. I like to think of him as a vacuum cleaner. That's up the top, and he just sucks bacteria, and they love eating bacteria. And all of a sudden, the sucking will stop, and out comes the waste material. And that waste material is what our plants really want to have their nutrients. We've joined the Digging Deeper group. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, with Terrain Runner. It's brilliant if you can do it. And we learnt how to read a soil test. And by getting a totals on your test, we found that in our soil we're not missing any minerals. There is in fact enough minerals in our soil to last us a few lifetimes. But what we are missing is the biology to make it available to the plants.
With saying that our climate has always been variable, but now it's changing. And I do believe there are a lot of people, I'm not saying people in this room, but generally out there in the community, who confuse climate variability with climate change. And they are quite different, but they are also linked. So this particular diagram was put together by Jones and Manns, and it doesn't have any numbers on the axes, so it's strictly schematic. And what we might think about this as being a graph of temperature. And we know that around 10,000 years ago, 8 to 10,000 years ago, we came out of the last glaciation. Sea levels rose, stabilised around 8,000 years ago. They've moved up a little bit and down since then. And in the last 10,000 years, we've had obviously the evolution of agriculture has been in the last 2,000 years. Civilisations have come and gone, but a lot of human endeavours have been in the last 10,000 years or so, coming out of that glacial period into the interglacial. But during that time, societies came and went, ecosystems persisted, natural ecosystems, agro-ecosystems, but we had a stationary climate, but it was variable. So this could be temperature showing we had some warm years, we had some cooler years. These could be El Nino years, these could be La Nina years. This could be after an eruption from a big volcano somewhere in Indonesia, putting a lot of aerosols up into the stratosphere, reflecting sunlight back out to space, therefore you get a cooler year. We know all of those drivers affect our climate, but if you fitted a smoothing line to that, you would have a flat climate, a stationary climate, but variable. And when we think about Australia, what we're known for is our highly variable and erratic climate, particularly with rainfall. We've seen earlier talk today, one photo is a drought, one photo underwater. But if you look at this graph, you can see that we've reached a point here where we're still getting variability, but we're seeing a change. We've been able to cope with that variability with our agriculture, with our human societies, with things like water supply, food production. Our ecosystems have also been able to cope with that variability. They also occasionally get affected by cyclones or coral bleaching or etc., but they always bounce back. Because largely our climate was within the coping range, but occasionally things did pop outside the coping range, either above or below. But if you look at where we are here, we're now moving into an era, this could be for temperature, where we're still getting hot years and cool years, but we're moving upwards. So if we fitted a line to that, a running mean to that, we would have an upward trajectory. And of course, if we start moving out of the coping range, it could be going this way, by the way, or going that way, we are having to think about adaptation, new ways of doing things, including agriculture, and to prevent us from moving into being vulnerable. There were some very smart people a long time ago who they often had physics backgrounds or physical chemistry backgrounds, including John Tyndall, the British physicist. 1859 he published work where he measured the heat absorption of greenhouse gases. He's kind of probably the first person. There might have been others around that time. This stern-looking Swedish gentleman, Svante Arrhenius, he predicted back in 1896, again from physics principles, that if we doubled the amount of CO2, we would get around 5 to 6 degrees of warming. Now, in 1896, we had around 290 parts per million when he was living, 290 parts per million in the atmosphere. Beginning of the Industrial Revolution was 280, and it went up and down with the glacial cycles, but it never exceeded 290 for at least 800,000 years. We're now, I'll come to it in a moment, we're now on 411 parts per million. Carbon dioxide is a very plentiful greenhouse gas, it's the most plentiful, but actually it's not as potent as some of these other ones by volume. Nitrous oxides from industry and fossil fuels, methane from agriculture, and also permafrost, are fairly short-lived, although methane is moderately, it'll be in the atmosphere for a few decades at least. Nitrous oxides much less than that, but they're extremely potent by volume. Whereas CO2 is very long-lived, it's the most numerous greenhouse gas, and it's got a residence time, how long it's in the atmosphere, we're talking centuries, potentially. So it's got a long residence time. So in that respect, it's a bit of a baddie, because once it's up there, we're already locked into some change. Even if we bring emissions down tomorrow to zero, which obviously we can't. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, with the different greenhouse gases behave in different ways. And of course, water vapour is also a greenhouse gas. It doesn't get talked about very often. But if we increase the temperature by 1 degree Celsius, we increase the water storing capacity of that volume of air by 7%. So we increase the amount of water vapour as well. And we've got more water vapour, we get more extreme rainfall events, because we've got more energy, more water in the system. If we didn't have greenhouse gases, our average temperature would be minus 18 degrees Celsius. We'd be an ice planet, right? It'd be way too cold, so that's the analogy of Goldilocks. As it turns out, though, we've got just the right, up until we started releasing more into the atmosphere, for many, many thousands of years, we had just the right amount, that sort of 280, 290 parts per million, and that kept us around plus 15 for the whole planet. Now, to give you an idea, what happens if you get a runaway greenhouse effect? I'm not saying that's going to happen with Earth. With Venus, it probably happened because of a lot of volcanic activity. But you end up having too much carbon dioxide. You have a surface temperature of 450 degrees Celsius. Another thing that can affect our climate are these external forcing mechanisms. Now, volcanic eruptions do play a role in our climate. Mount Pinatubo was a big eruption in 1991 in the Philippines. It caused around 0.5 to 0.6 of a degree of global cooling for a couple of years after the eruption, because of the stratospheric aerosols that were floating around the stratosphere reflecting sunlight back out to space. But it's only a temporary. Once again, the atmosphere recovers again and your temperatures recover again. Another big driver, of course, is the sun. The sun goes through 11-year sunspot cycles. It goes through periods when it's very active, and periods of time when it's less active. Now, during the Little Ice Age, it went through a period where there were no sunspots for some long period of time. And Little Ice Age played out globally. Glaciers advanced. The Thames used to freeze regularly in London, and it was an interesting time. And it was a period where the Greenland, people had to get out of Greenland because they just couldn't farm there anymore. We look at rainfall. This is the northern dry season when we don't get much rain anyway, so keep that in mind. Some evidence that we're just getting more of this sort of wetter dry seasons. And again, this won't be very, very much in the way of rainfall, but southern tablelands is an area that seems to be getting less dry season rain, which they need for the dairy industry, which is quite interesting. They do need to get that rain all through the year because they're relying on unirrigated pastures. But I guess the real scary message in this diagram is not for us in the north. The fact is that the northern dry season is the southern wet season. This is when they're supposed to get rain in the Mediterranean parts of southwest Australia and southern and parts of western Victoria. They're showing a significant drying trend. This has huge implications for our future. This is where most of our people live. This is where most of our cropping systems are. At the moment, though, we appear to be at the best end of the continent for things like rainfall change. That's the northern dry season. Let's go to the northern wet season, which is the summer dry season. And what it's showing is there is some evidence that we're getting some above average patterns particularly in the top end, but also northern Cape York and this region too. And we're very significantly getting a lot of drying in western. You're not getting the cold fronts coming through in the summer, which they need for their hydro, for example. The hydro dams need to be topped up. This is a real worry for Western Tasmania. And they're getting less rain here as well. But normally they wouldn't get much rain here in the summer anyway, because it's the Mediterranean climate. So maybe not such a bad message for Northern Australia for rainfall. All right, what about Australia's future? Again, this is a nice snappy summary. What we're expecting is tropical cyclones to decrease in number, but to increase in intensity. I won't go into the details why they're decreasing in number. It's quite a long story in its own right. Intensity, though, is simply because there's more energy. Warmer atmosphere, warmer oceans, that's what feeds cyclones, is energy. Okay. We're expecting extreme rainfall events likely to be more intense for the same reason. We've got more energy in the system. We're going to get more of these flash floods and extreme rainfall events. For Australia, though, not so much us in the north, but harsher fire weather for southern and eastern Australia. Decreases in winter and spring rainfall for southern continental Australia, which is critical for their growing season. Not good at all, good story at all, and an increase in droughts. We're expecting temperatures to continue to go up, and again, that'll be driven by emissions. The more the emissions, greenhouse gases, the higher the rates of temperature rise. We can do all these wonderful things with soil carbon in the meantime, of course, which will help. Sea level will continue to rise, and oceans will continue to warm, and they will also dissolve carbon dioxide and become more acidic.
And what, I won't ask you specifically who, but I was just wondering what type of entities are actually interested in purchasing the carbon credits.
So there are people, there are organisations that want to offset their carbon footprint. So, for example, airlines are looking at buying carbon credits. They're trying to market the soil carbon credit as like a gourmet type carbon credit. So they can buy carbon credits on the open market from various sources where people have offset, for example, carbon. They've got offset in different ways, planting trees, for example, or different practices. But soil carbon credits, they're trying to market them as something a bit special because it's to do with agriculture and food security as well. And there's some kudos again, an airline that can promote that they've offset their travel carbon footprint by using soil carbon credits. So it's helping agriculture and the whole good news story that's around that.
Hello guys, Michael. Does that carbon get sequestered into the soil the same way that it does in humus, locked up there, because it doesn't cycle back?
Yep. So humus, the latest carbon chemistry on humus is basically not a discrete compound that's known as humus. It's more of a generic name for the end product of carbon after it's been digested by microbes. So it's kind of a generic name, but it is regarded as a more stable form of carbon or calcium, and that certainly melon would be actually lumped into the same family as humus. The difference, or slight difference with melon and with this particular mechanism using a particular fungus to do that job is securing it inside the microaggregate. So the more carbon we can get inside microaggregates or deep down in the profile away from oxygen, the longer lived that carbon will be. So any carbon that's exposed to oxygen, even biochar, for example, will slowly but surely oxidise.
So then I have another question. So then it can't be farmed, you can't plough it, but that same land could be grazed over because you're not tilling and destroying the soil aggregate. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's still the same principles for carbon building soil carbon apply. So the more you till the soil, the more you expose it to oxygen. So the more oxidation takes place and the more carbon disappears from the paddock. And I often say to people it's a shame that carbon dioxide is a clear, odourless gas because you can't see it disappearing from your soil. When you till the soil and you go, wow, that smells nice and it looks lovely and smooth and tilled, you can't actually see the carbon escaping from the paddock that's leaking out of the paddock. If it was a purple gas or something like that, people might be a bit more horrified at how much carbon they're actually losing by tillage. So the same principles apply. Less tillage means less carbon loss, less breaking up of microaggregates. So as soon as you break the microaggregate open, it'll expose it to oxidation.
Guy, Peter Speaks here from RCS. We're actually working in this space, as you probably realise. I'm just inquiring about your calculation of 120 tonne per hectare, realising, say, if you've got soil organic carbon at around 1.2%, and depending on the bulk density of your soil, that might convert to something like 16 tonnes of carbon within the soil. And we're looking at multi-species cropping and other things to increase and cover cropping to increase soil organic matter there, and carbon capture. In rangeland situations, a lot of this, if you've got 3 to 5 tonne, of grass material above ground, growth per hectare, up to sugarcane of, let's say, 140. I'm just wondering how you're calculating that 120 tonnes per hectare, whether that's over a longer period, how you derived that figure.
Yep. So that's carbon, organic carbon, soil organic carbon measurement down to a metre and multiplied by 3.67, the conversion back to the carbon dioxide equivalents, and that sequestration event was over 10 years.
Oh, okay, no worries. Yeah, and what I was talking about there was normally the 0 to 10 centimetres, of that 16 odd tonne.
Yeah, no, that was the sort of exciting thing when we started to do the cores, and we thought, let's keep going a bit deeper and got down to a metre, and we're still seeing dark staining in the soil. Keeping in mind it's only a light sort of long, sandy, rubbishy sort of soil. We didn't expect there to be carbon sequestration down that deep. But that's all tradable carbon, so why not? And we want it down deep. So, yeah, it was just an indication there that maybe we should be, trading deeper carbon, having a bit look at some of the deep stuff. If we can get it down there, we might as well trade it.
Yeah, we're looking at the liquid carbon pathway there, and once you get carbon down below 20 centimetres, it's normally stable, so a lot of the methodology and corings using SIS Trimble technology. Thanks.
So you're going down to a metre in what the work you're doing there?
Yes, or Terry is, from one of the offset, one of his other companies with RCS in conjunction there.
So that's with the little buggy that he drives across with the gamma ray mapping and so on.
No, they've been using SIS Trimble, taking cores down, so yeah.
Okay.
But no, just interesting how you did those calculations, because a lot of it we were probably looking at it in an extensive grazing sense. If you're getting 3, 4, 5 tonne of sequestration, say in a lot of the broadland, rangeland areas worked out to be, could be at around, $67 per hectare return. but that was, in those extensive, and that would be per annum. But yeah, no, I just wanted to see how you come at that figure.
Yeah,
Thanks.
right, so down to a metre over 10 years, so, it's giving it its best, I guess, but it's an indication of what can happen. It's really just a field study that we've got there, and it's something that gives an indication of how fast and how far you can go with this sort of carbon sequestration method.
Yep, thanks.
Hi, I was just wondering about the MET 222, where you were saying that you had 17% increase in soil carbon in the first 4 weeks, and I think it was 30% with the canola in the first 4 weeks. I was wondering if you had done any long-term trials and if the carbon uptake level continued at those rates, or if that was just an initial boost to the soil.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that field study is the only long-term results that we've got at the moment. So that's kind of like a 10-year study. All the other stuff is done on short-term stuff to see if the crop A will get inoculated with the fungus, and B, is there a carbon gain happening there? So it's definitely, it's going to be one of the next phases of the research day to get some long studies in the ground with various crops and see what's happening over longer periods of time. So we haven't got there yet. But in that initial study with the 14% increase in 17% in 14 weeks, they also wet sieved the aggregates and to find whether the carbon was indeed going into the aggregates, and that was our part of research that showed there was significant amounts of that carbon gain ending up in the micro aggregates, which was really the can we grow recalcitrant carbon? And that was an affirmative result. Need to do longer studies and that will unfold as we go forward. But we've established that we're producing recalcitrant carbon in those trials, which is one of the things that we're really going to tick box of.
Hi.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, just as from the respect of the fungi, some fungi are more plant-specific than others. Can this be adopted, have you found, through a wide variety of plants that it can be used with?
Yeah, there's going to be different isolates will suit different plants. So we've tried the ones that we've got success with on broadleaf crops. We can't get them to take the grass crops at the moment. So we're prospecting others for grass crops. And we assume that there'll be something similar to what a legume chart is. You've got different rhizobium suit different legumes. It's not just one rhizobium bacteria that suits all legumes. We figure this probably will end up with a similar sort of a strategy with a group chart where we've got certain sets of endophytes that will suit certain crops. But it's all uncharted territory, and that's the exciting thing of it. There's so much work to be done here.